today. It's been a very rich conference, and it's hard to avoid forming an impression that the legal services sector is at the centre of something of a maelstrom. We've talked about how a light is being shone on professional ethics and the rule of law and what can happen to people, to real people, when those things aren't got right. We've talked about the access to justice landscape and the increasingly precarious state of the institutions we all depend on, and just how much positive difference can be made by the law and legal professionals when they are properly connected to people who need them. Inevitably, we've had the discussion of technology and in particular AI, and we've just had a brilliantly illuminating talk from Uwais, and I've got to say it's the second time I've heard it, and it was even better the second time. And in other fora, there were conversations about, for example, the role of lawyers in tackling climate change and things like kleptocracy and financial crime. And this is taking place against a backdrop of broader forces like global conflict and the erosion of trust in democratic institutions. Now, all of these things and more might have a profound impact on what it means to be a lawyer or indeed a legal business in the future. And that's the topic we're going to be looking at in the next 40 minutes or so. It's a very complex question, which is why I'm very fortunate that I'm the one who gets to ask it. Of my brilliant panelists, who I'm delighted to introduce in this order, is Singh Atwal, who's a commercial lawyer at West Midlands Police, Dana Denis-Smith, who's CEO of Obelisk Support, and then we have Stephen McCusker, who's a board member at the Architects Registration Board. I wonder how you feel let loose in the zoo today of non-architects and total lawyers. And then we have Adam Curphey, who's a steering board member of O-Shaped Lawyer. And last but not least, we have Lauren Watson, who's chair of the UK Legal Tech Association. So what will it mean to be a lawyer in 2034? And I'm just wondering where I'm going to go first. And I think I'm going to start with Bal, partly because you're closest to me, but partly because you are so deeply connected with the sort of next generation of solicitors in particular, and what might motivate them and what might their hopes and fears be for a career in the law. So any thoughts and reflections on that, Bal?
Just test my mic. So can everyone hear me there? Yeah, perfect. So in the next 10 years, I think lots to kind of expect within legal. So I'm an in-house solicitor, and currently 1 in 4 solicitors across England and Wales are in-house. For me, I see that number increasing, potentially 50% of the profession. And I think why that's happening, a lot of kind of elements of private practice that sometimes are being done good, sometimes not so good. And I think sometimes the not so good is making lawyers look at other avenues for their career, not only in-house, but the fixed term model, consultancy, and a whole host of other kind of career opportunities. And then in terms of kind of what junior lawyers want now, I think what junior lawyers want now is what will kind of be at the kind of forefront of our profession in terms of regulation and what people will take as a given when they come into the legal profession. So some of the kind of main topical issues for junior lawyers now, so diversity and inclusion, whether that's getting into law firms, as well as retention within law firms. The environment is a massive one as well. The next kind of generation of lawyers is very much conscious about their kind of green impact, and that's not something that kind of I was aware of when I was a kind of student or trainee, but that's a massive thing now, and a whole host of a kind of other elements. Mental health is a massive one as well, recently in the news. So there'll be lots of kind of big issues which are important now, but which will form a massive part of the profession in 10 years' time.
That's great. And Dana, I mean, you've led a lot of work, haven't you? Looking at the next generation of lawyers, what they might expect that is different to the generations that have gone before it. Is there anything from what Bal said that strikes a chord with you from your work?
I think one of the things we found, and I think it's really encouraging, is that everything that we heard earlier around what doesn't work or hasn't worked, it's being leveraged actually by the next generation. They want to be purposeful lawyers. They want to be ethical. And that is a great generation to grow and bring up, because we haven't always thought that way. So I think a lot of the things that we found in the news and all the kind of culture of law firms and the partnership models and all the kind of change we've been through in the last 10 years, it's kind of been felt by the new generation. They know they're coming into a moment of change, but their voices can be heard. And that's really exciting. I mean, one of the things that really struck with me when we did research recently was, junior lawyers saying, so what, you've put up with terrible behavior, I won't accept it. I will speak up. I will not put up with being harassed. I do not want to be sexually harassed at work, and I will not accept work that is unethical. So that's really, I think, a foundation we can build on and actually help them become stronger lawyers. But I'm very encouraged by the fact that they want to be more purposeful, because I think we need that for social justice. We heard about how many people aren't being helped, and actually having a new generation of lawyers wanting to be more relevant to society. And we always say lawyers, with society we serve and all of that, they want to do it. And I think we should absolutely scale it up.
Playing devil's advocate, I mean, there are some who would argue that the notion of a lawyer making choices about the sort of work that they take on is conflicts with a professional duty. I mean, did you pick up any sense of that in the work that you've done? And I wonder whether other colleagues have any views on that.
Absolutely. I think that was very much, the kind of independent lawyer aspect and what is ethical, but we've heard it's very complicated. But at the end of the day, right now, they're not being helped. They need to be helped to understand the different elements that make a good lawyer. And then obviously we know we are there to serve and actually uphold the rule of law, which is the overarching objective. But right now they're struggling because they're having, a lot of misjustice conversations. They're hearing, lots of things are going wrong. They want to do the right thing. So how can we really grow that and help them understand the difference between independence, being ethical, and all these big concepts? They're not really being taught, even at law school. So they come in quite unprepared, but I think they're willing, they're sponges, we can really work with that. They're not fully formed, but I think their kind of moral compass is right. They're rejecting some practices that are correctly rejected. And obviously, I've rejected a lot of things that I felt weren't working. For women in particular, what is that? You start, you train, you work really hard, and then suddenly you have a child, you're no good. It's not okay that we structure the profession in this inflexible way that only works for some, but they all look in the same image, So we have issues that I think our generation, my generation at least, we need to own them. We have created a structure that isn't working. It's not delivering for the individuals and actually for society. So I'm excited that the new generation are picking up on the big themes and we can work with them. And that's an opportunity for us.
Right, thank you. Now Stephen's deploying his pattern recognition and thinking I'm going to Stephen next, but I'm not. I'm going to go to Lauren because actually the young lawyers that we've been talking about will be coming into a workplace that in due course, in fact, probably already is becoming radically different. We've heard very compelling testimony from Awais about, what the machine will be capable of doing in terms of lawyers' work in the future. So when you listen to Bal and Dana, what do you see the impact of those changes being?
I think technology can be an amazing tool to enable people to do more purposeful work. I think a lot of junior lawyers come into the profession expecting to be able to deliver really high value outcomes for clients, whether they're working in small businesses or big enterprises, or whether they're doing working more with consumers. And a lot of the time, one of the barriers to actually being able to do really high value, purposeful work is a lot of the kind of grunt work that actually sits around the legal profession that prevents people from being able to do the high impact client facing type work. And I don't think I really enjoyed Awais' presentation. I think it's really important to remember that there's actually very few people that are talking about a world of like robot lawyers or whatever. I think that's really people jumping to an extreme. I think what most people are talking about is using AI as a way to do more purposeful, high value work. And high value work could mean, linking to what the two panels before I've just mentioned, is just, actually helping do real legal tangible things for clients. And we'll probably find a way for junior lawyers to deliver even more impact in the future by removing some of the more tedious, time-consuming, paper-driven tasks, which can largely be supported now with the use of the correct legal AI tools and as always said, you know, making sure that we have the knowledge and the education to use those tools to serve the right purpose. We're not trying to use a microwave when we need a toaster, you know.
Thinking about the debate we had earlier on about access to justice and Dan Newman's testimony about technology playing a role but not being the panacea. And Lauren, you're talking about freeing up lawyers from grunt work so they can do more of the high impact work. Is there a part of this conversation which is about distributing the legal expertise perhaps a bit more equitably? So it's not just more high impact work for a small number of clients, but spreading the love around a little bit more.
Yes, I think one of the things I wanted to share on this panel, which I think is something we should all take away and think about, is the emerging sort of delta between what the top elite law firms in the UK are doing, and then the very, very long tail of smaller and mid-market law firms that are in the UK that don't necessarily have the people or the process or the kind of existing technology to actually be able to make the most. And that long tail of small law firms are often the ones servicing consumers and local businesses. And, you know, I hear all the time everyone talking about how small businesses are the backbone of the UK economy, and that's great, but those small businesses are going to need better support, and the people who are supporting those small businesses are small law firms. And so the technology is evolving so quickly. Right now, only the really big firms are actually investing in it or actually exploring it. I am quite worried about this kind of increasing delta. But don't get me wrong, there are small law firms that are using this as an opportunity to level the playing field with the bigger firms, and they do exist, but I think the majority are at quite a significant risk of getting left behind, because even in the space, and someone like Uwais, I'm sure, could talk to this more, but even within the last 12 months, the power of large language models has evolved significantly. This week, Anthropic has released 3 new versions of Claude, one of which is now purporting to outperform GPT-4. Like the type of technology the type of technology advancements that we're going to see in the next 12 months, you know, if we're not all having a serious conversation about what we do right now, there are a lot of firms that are going to get really left behind. And the consequence of that is that people don't benefit, small businesses don't benefit, but the big global corporates and the big kind of global elite do. And, you know, as we've heard, there are lots of lawyers and lots of junior lawyers who want to be doing work that isn't that.
I'm going to come to Adam in a second, because I want to hear about what this all means about training and onboarding lawyers. But Stephen, is there anything in what you're hearing that resonates with the experience of the architect's profession? Because you've been through a technological transformation.
Yeah, we still are going through it. I mean, when I started, even when I finished university just at the end of the last century, we were still using tracing paper and pen and ink in university education. That was how we were drawing things. But lots of other people, but it was usually only people who could afford the computer packages, the software at that time as it was developing, that could kind of lead the way. But then we had building information modeling that happened maybe just over 20 years ago. That really changed everything. And now with AI as well. But the software licenses are costly, and you do see that a lot of the larger firms are kind of leading the field in that. And it's about that initial investment as well for the startups. But it's exciting because I part-time, I'm half and half. I'm a practicing educator or a academic practitioner. I teach and practice, and what I can see is that social engagement and the social value that the new generation are really hungry for, and they want to apply that. But that's actually moving across into the larger corporate worlds as well, with things like social value and things like B Corps that are coming through. And actually, if you want larger contracts, a lot of the time you have to demonstrate that social value, and who better to do that than the people who are interested in it. But a lot of the tasks, AI is having an impact very quickly on us in terms of generative ideas, the grunt work, but also in terms of the options appraisals and the variations that you can get to do things that take up a lot of time. that you could actually start to automate a lot of those tasks and free up that creativity. This week's National Careers Week, I think. So I've been doing some stuff with high schools, and I get a lot of questions from people saying, I have to be good at art to be an architect. Well, actually, you don't anymore. You can get a computer to help you do that. You don't need to draw anymore. And
So what then is the value that the architect adds in that respect? And the reason I ask that question is not to challenge that the architect is not to challenge the value that the architect does add, but to see whether there's a read across between that question and then what is the value that the lawyer adds in a world where much of that will be able to be done by machine.
I think it's the Marge model that US was talking about before. It's and actually freeing up your day to day. If you have to spend a lot of your time developing options and doing a lot of the administrative stuff, you can actually invest that time in more creative solutions and actually thinking about doing a better job and how you can pass on that knowledge to other people more. Because I think the day-to-day tasks soak up a lot of my time. If I can start to get a machine to help me with that, then I can pass on knowledge that I've already got to other people, and then we have more people informing the machines in better ways, and that accumulates very quickly.
Could I just add something? I think actually that's a very interesting perspective, because I think what will improve is the human experience, which is always last, but should be always first. And I think there's no better example than architecture, where we all inhabit a space. If you only draw and it's beautiful and it's straight line and everything, and actually you are feeling like a lot of people in big law firms feel completely claustrophobic in a box, maybe it's not a great human experience. So maybe that's where we free ourselves, because we will put the human at the center of the experience we're trying to create. And then we make a difference to the end user, people that we heard earlier, who still suffer today from the consequences of our actions. So to me, it is about human experience. And if technology can help us major on it, that's a big win for humanity.
So that is a beautiful link. So Adam, whose business is to put the human at the center of lawyering. And I know you've waited very patiently, Adam, so unburden yourself.
Yeah, well, I'm actually sat here with 3 different hats on, really, which is a bit weird. So I'm a steering board member of the O-Shaped Lawyer. The O-Shaped Lawyer was started by a group of GCs to put the human front and center, and to put the human stories and elements front and center for legal advice. So that means being better at communication, collaboration, the way in which you present advice to people, giving people the information they want within the context of what they want it. And that is constantly going back to the in-house community and finding ways to value that and start that culture shift. And some of that is through training, some of that is through making partnerships between clients and law firms. Some of that is looking at in-house teams and how they can work together. And some of it is rewarding those people who are out there who are really changing things from a human perspective, like Bal, who recently was one of the winners on the O-List, which is our first awards ceremony for the O-Shaped. The other hat I'm here with is that I lead innovation for Europe for Mayor Brown. So it's the big law hat, where we're seeing the investment into AI and technology. That's basically what I do with my day job now. It's all Gen AI, and looking at the strategy and how we're going to roll it out and how we're going to use it and how do we best appreciate it. And the other hat is professor at BPP, where I still teach future lawyers about what they can do and how they can make the most.
To be here?
That's why I didn't come to the briefing call. Sorry. But yeah, so what I'm seeing is kind of a combination of all of this. And there is that push from junior lawyers to be much more human in the way we do things. There is a request from clients and in-house teams that that's what they want. And I think what we're going to see in the future is more adaptability and more hybrid type roles, particularly around, traditionally it's been you go junior, senior, partner. In-house teams are already getting super adaptable. The law departments are seconding into other teams and other business departments within there and are picking up new skills. Law firms are starting to pick up on that as well. And I think we're going to see many more people talk about the staffing models changing in the future and having fewer juniors because a lot of this grunt work's being picked up. Well, I personally think that's an opportunity to have hybrid juniors who have that legal advice and knowledge, but also specialize in technology, in project management, in doing the processes, in understanding the business, in having those human elements. So I think that's where there is a real opportunity here to rethink about how we train, onboard, and progress lawyers through their life.
Right, thank you. I'm going to come to the audience in a second, but so you can be getting your thinking caps on. But Bal, let me put it to you, and I hope this isn't unfair, not on you, but you work in arguably a sort of more traditional setting in West Midlands Police, and listening to some of the innovative ideas that that colleagues have been talking about. I mean, do you see that being picked up in a sort of in the environment you work in?
So yeah, I come from quite an interesting background. So I trained at a mid-sized international law firm, qualified at a global law firm, and now currently sit in the public sector. So I've seen the legal profession in so many different kind of lenses. I will say the public sector will be slower in terms of adopting kind of technology. But the obvious reason for that is that we kind of operate with public funds. And it's absolutely right that we use the public funds in the most cautious and kind of risk-averse way. I'm pretty sure everyone would agree with that. I think that the technology shift in terms of AI will happen from the big law firms because they have the money, because they have the time, because they have the resources. But I think for the public sector to really kind of progress in terms of technology, we'll probably need guidance from our regulators. We'll probably need guidance from government first before it kind of progresses. But from my time in kind of the global law firms, they do use elements of AI to do basic tasks. But for it to get to that next level from the microwave to the air fryer, that's when people will need to take that leap of faith then.
Thank you. Now let's take one good question from the audience and get a conversation going on the back of that question. Who's going to volunteer? I'm not going to describe you, either what you're wearing or your gender, but the person with their hand up.
Thank you so much. And I am feeling the pressure for a good question. I'm not sure if it's good, but my name is Martha Delvache. I am the Partnerships Director at the Access to Justice Foundation. And I know this panel is on what it will mean to be a lawyer in 2034, but I wondered if any of the members of the panel had any thoughts on what it would mean to be a consumer of legal services in 2034, and in particular as an independent person trying to access legal services in 10 years' time.
Great question. Who'd like to start the bidding?
I'm happy to jump in.
Lauren.
I think even before the kind of last 12 months and the kind of the rise of awareness around generative AI, I think COVID already set in motion a very different appetite and expectation from consumers about the way that they expect legal services to be delivered. So I think, being able to onboard as a new client with a law firm remotely was something that I saw personally shift from something that only a handful of firms could actually really do end to end. So by the end of the first year of 2020, a big significant majority of law firms were completely transforming their onboarding experience. And I do think that the next generation of consumers expect a more digital first way of working. I personally, when I instructed a lawyer 2 years ago, was asked 6 times to go and sign documents at the law firm. And I was like, can I use my own DocuSign account to sign this? And they were like, oh, I don't know. So yeah, I think even at the kind of baseline, people will expect a much more digital first experience now. And I do think that consumers will expect, both business and, sort of individual consumers will expect to have pricing that is very transparent and probably more value or outcome based pricing rather than. It's going to become increasingly hard, is my hot take, for big law firms to justify the billable hours.
Slightly further, because I mean that's a great answer for the sort of savvier consumer. But if you replaced consumer with person in need, would your answer change at all?
I mean, I think I can't remember what I read the stat earlier this week. I mean, a lot of people have mobile phones and expect to be able to have services on mobile phones. And that's people, one of the very common, one of the things that I hate hearing is, when people are looking at the homeless or refugees being like, well, why have they got phones? It's like, because the phone is critical to you being able to access most services now in society. And I think we should be thinking about how we're doing design that's optimized for mobile, how we we doing things that are making tech more accessible to groups who may not be able to kind of, you know, who are visually impaired or who, you know, need different types of tech design. I think there is still an important role to be played for being able to sort of have someone to speak to. And I think the whole argument of what we're saying today with developments like AI is that there is a world where you have more time to speak to real people because you're not filing paperwork or you're not doing the types of tasks that you know, sink loads of time but don't actually add real value to communities or to people.
Just
We'll go to Dana and then we'll go to Adam. Thank you.
I'll tell you what my hopes for the future are from a consumer point of view. I like us to have a legal service provision where people are not afraid. I think it would be really helpful if people stop being scared of law, not because, as we heard, sometimes people do nothing wrong. Their parents die, they have probate, nobody did anything wrong. And there's this kind of sense of justice or law interactions that are making people afraid. That really worries me because that is where we can't cut through. No means of communicating around law really transcends to the public. There's no way of telling stories that educating the public about how to use us in a good way. And that's because they're afraid, because we have this language of the force of law coming down on you. And everybody's, you know, it's meant to be you are guilty, you're innocent, you're proven guilty, but everybody feels guilty until they're proven innocent. So that's something wrong around how our whole legal system puts fear in the consumer's mind. At any interaction with law, they're afraid. And whether if they're vulnerable, they're even more afraid. But even if I get some kind of legal letter that's completely irrelevant and I haven't done anything wrong, and I'm a lawyer, I'm trying to decipher what are they on and what is happening and can I really take it on? That's not okay. So from a kind of, how do we experience law as an aid that really wants us to respect? Respecting is not the same as being afraid. And I think this becomes this kind of really complicated maze where people are scared of lawyers, of anything to do with law. The courts are a maze that you just don't know. Even if you are a lawyer and you experience law, it's horrible. So we have to do something about it because we can't just lead and say we want people to access justice, we want to do more, we want to be purposeful, but we are actually in reality making people afraid. So maybe we stop making people afraid. How? I don't know, but just.
Yeah, I was going to talk more about the delivery piece as well, because, and I do think it can tie together two of those bits a little bit, because what you see right from the top down is people want more advice that is within the context in which they're asking instead of just here's a standard answer. And that applies from the biggest clients who are sitting there going, well, you don't understand our strategy, you've never asked, you don't know what financial position we're in. There was a law firm that used to call it the red wine problem, that a client goes home, has a red wine, looks at their tablet, and they want to see what's happened with their legal work, and they just weren't able to. It wasn't transparent in that way. So they want more of that. And then at the other end of the scale, where you've got people who are in need, we did, for example, a project for refugees going into Hong Kong, the education system, right? And it was a huge book. And we turned it into an app that people could, and that was legal design. And that was through thinking, how do we create something that works for these people that's still accessible and still usable? And I think one of the things that makes people afraid is law has built this whole reputation around the way in which those letters are worded, the way in which we use language. It almost seems to be like a gateway that you can't get through. And what some of these tools can do is, well, they can do translation. That was one thing that wasn't on your list. It said add another one. A lot of our lawyers use it for translation. You can translate legalese. Tell me what this means for me within the context of this. Will it get 100% right every time? No, but it will give you more of a context and it might help take some of that fear out. So I think there's some of that bit of being able to do a bit more as a litigant in person or an individual who is going through the legal system.
Am I being told to wrap up?
No, you'll be told there's good questions online.
There's some good questions online. Okay, that's great. Okay, there are some good questions online.
Okay, I've got 3 key points here and I'll give them to you all in one. So the first one is, could lawyers who don't embrace AI find themselves on the wrong side of regulation one day? I.e., will it be a test of competence in some way if they're not using technologies available to them. Secondly, there's some concern around how do we support new practitioners or people early in their career to setting up a small business that might be entering a market operating with bigger firms with technologies available to those with more resources and time, or are we going to see more of a squeeze on that kind of business structure? And the third one is what will the billable hours structure look like in 10 years as well? So, a few
So-
things there to keep it going.
I'm going to exercise chair's prerogative and ask the first one, which is that not if the LSB has got anything to do with it. I mean, this is a common misconception that in our work on technology, we're sort of forcing everybody to adopt. We're not. We're trying to create an open stance for innovation and technology. So I hope that will put people's minds at rest. But the other two questions I think are fair game for you guys. New lawyers, incoming lawyers, help with setting up a business. And is this the end of the billable hour? Stephen's going to head off.
So we had we touched on this when we met a few weeks ago with the billable hours, because there is a comparison in our sector, and I think it partly responds to the consumer experience that was asked before, because I think there's an opportunity to standardize a lot of everyday architecture works. And if you're working for I mean, a lot of people here live in houses, yeah. It's a huge amount. Architecture is not always about the glory projects, and there's a lot of everyday work that happens in architecture. And the people who are doing that, like when I'm buying my house, you're thinking, how much is it going to cost to get a lawyer to help me with that task? You think, how much is it going to cost me to engage with a professional architect who's going to help me design something or change my house? And I think a lot of those things with the technology can actually be standardized in some way. And I've seen some very good models of practices that are they're producing like it's one of those or one of these or one of those. There may be a slight variation on that, but that's kind of our template, and we start from there. And they can actually reduce the cost of that by standardizing it. And that's not necessarily restricted to a large corporate kind of practice. But the other thing I think is happening is that the profession, and I think this is happening in your professions as well, that it's diversifying in the range of what it means to be that individual, that professional, and that competence test is not about all of the different things that you have to be able to do. It's about making sure that you're competent in what you are actually doing. And I think we're moving away from it. When I looked at the word architect, I used to think, okay, that's that thing. That's very definable. Now that's gone. We have architects who just code all day. We have architects who engage with people all day. We have architects who are designing skyscrapers. We have architects. The range of what that word means now is fantastic, and I think that will broaden that market as well.
Fantastic, thank you. I wonder, Dana, I mean, some of your work has involved trying to understand different ways in which the law and lawyers are valued. And I know it's a bit of a truism to say we've, the curse of the billable hour, but I mean, I detect an appetite in your report from younger lawyers to take a different approach to how they are valued.
So I think billable hour as a concept is not the problem. The problem is what it does. So it has, the obsession with how many hours you bill. It's what you measure with the billable hour that's the problem. So, if you've got 2,000 hours that you have to bill to qualify for partnership, for example, obviously the billable hour is a problem because it creates the wrong pressure, the wrong metrics, and it creates with the wrong results. And sometimes it leads to death, as we found out recently. So it's just the nonsense as a metric. Equally, there's lack of transparency. So you end up putting your time on the clock and the client doesn't know. Maybe they don't have a problem with the billable hour as such as a way of measuring the work. But if they don't know what's gone into the black box, that's where the billable hour is, again, not transparent, and people don't know. There's a lack of communication around what did I get for the 10 hours you put in? And that's our inability to explain our work and really unbundle it and communicate. So I don't think the billable hour is a problem because sometimes it's a suitable solution for something that might take 3 hours to do. The problem is the pressure it creates and then the culture it creates when it becomes this horrible culture of sometimes as far as abuse, and that is not it's not right, and also it's not measuring the right behaviors, and it creates a lack of balance between the results we want and the input we put in. So I think I don't have a problem with it as such. I think younger people don't have a problem with it as such. It creates the wrong culture, and then they have a problem. Is there no other way?
Thank you. We'll Adam and then Lauren, and I'm just going to do a time check. How are we doing? Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I was just going to say that even where you do start seeing those hourly way of doing it by the hour disappear, like where we're talking about law firms now are increasingly seeing alternative fee arrangements or effective fee arrangements or whatever you want to call it, which isn't paid for by the hour. In the back end, they're still being judged by how many hours they do. So even if we get up here and go, oh, the billable hour is gone because 50% of clients aren't using it, in the back end, you've still got to do your 2,300 hours, or you've got to do whatever to be able to do these things. And that continues to be the way we value innovation or pro bono. You can have a small segment of these hours and they work for this, but not for that. And that's the way it's going to go. So I don't think the pressure necessarily disappears, even if we start seeing new types of fee arrangement come up, because it's about how you reward lawyers on the back end. And a lot of the way that law firms work in particular is short-termism. It's 1 year, get the money out, don't reinvest it, give it to the partners, and then we move on and we move on and move on. And that doesn't make for longer term change. But, yeah.
So just before you come in, Lauren, just to give you a heads up, to close the session off, I'm going to ask for a question from the audience after Lauren's contribution. And I'm looking for great questions to which the answer is either yes or no. So, Lauren, give them a bit of time.
Yeah, that's going to be a tough one. So I don't disagree that the billable hour creates this is the thing that fuels a lot of the toxic kind of behaviors that are in some of the bigger firms. But I would like to think that by 2034, we've come up with something a bit more radical in terms of how we think about pricing for value and outcomes, and get away from this. Even if we're not pricing by the hour on the back end, we are counting the hours or whatever. And I do think my kind of hot take is that AI is just going to force this to happen, because you will be able to do work that you used to bill 10 hours for, and you will be able to do it in an hour. And if law firms need to think about how they're going to survive, they're going to need to be thinking not about how many hours they're writing on the back end or whatever. They're going to need to be thinking about what is the outcome that I've driven for my client. And I do think that whereas this discussion has been going on certainly the entire time that I've worked in the legal industry, this might be the decade where something actually changes, because it's not. It also stifles innovation, by the way, is my other thought. Is like, why would a partner who is making £10,000 charging 10 hours worth of work wants to use technology that would, under this model, only get net £1,000? And so I think, like, if we want to move to a world where we are really innovative, we're thinking about client outcomes, we're thinking about value delivered to clients, we should get rid of it because of all the toxic stuff it does as well. But we should also get rid of it because it's actually not focused on driving or delivering value to people or businesses.
Thanks, Lauren. Right. So, look at all the hands. Phyllis, I should close my eyes and point. Person in the middle with a hand up.
Thank you, Matthew. Michaela Hardwick, Beyond Compliance. Given everything that we've talked about today and the panel, and particularly with reference to Adam's comments about adaptability being a future focus of future lawyers, do you think that the current linear model of training lawyers, including the apprenticeship pathway of a solicitor apprenticeship, a barrister apprenticeship, a legal technician apprenticeship, is fit for purpose?
Brilliant question. Yes or no? And we're going to go in order. Lauren.
No, because I'm making a new apprenticeship as well. So if you want to talk about it later, let me know.
No, based on my profession, no.
No.
Yes, but I think we need more data.
Very good. Well, look, we'll call that session to an end there. Thank you so much for contributing so fully and richly. So if you could show your appreciation to Lauren, Adam, Stephen, Dana, and Val, thank you.